Scheich, and I'm the editor of Farm Journal's Pork and serve on the Livestock Publications Council Board of Directors. And Angie Denton and I are teaming together along with a larger committee as well of LPC members to work to bring you guys LPC Coffee Collaboration each month, where we basically share some of our best practices, challenges, cool things we're learning, and basically just provide an opportunity for our membership to get together and chat about different topics to keep us connected all year round. And especially in light of the world that we're in today, this is proving to just be a nice opportunity to see some familiar faces and to catch up, so to speak. But today we're excited to introduce two industry experts in the area of agricultural journalism and communications. And they're going to be talking to us today about interviewing. And so, you know, interviewing is a big part of what many of us do every day, but I have found that there are never too many tips and strategies that I can take away to help me be better when it comes to those bits of time that I get to have with people in an interview. And so it's always fun to learn what others do and what works for them. And so today we have JoAnn Pipkin. She is the owner of Show Me Agricom, and she's going to be sharing some of her experiences, as well as our LPC president, Jen Carrico. She is the Southwest Iowa membership coordinator for the Iowa Cattlemen's Association. And so they're going to talk about interviewing based on their years of experience and what they're doing in their jobs now. And before they get started, I just wanted to remind you guys that at the very bottom of your screen, there's a chat bubble. Please feel free to ask questions as we go. They're going to run through their presentation for you and then open it up for questions at the end. But feel free to note those as you go, or to share other ideas or thoughts if you'd like. That's there for building that conversation. And we'd be remiss to not mention that this wouldn't be possible without the support of Rock and K Productions, and we're grateful for all they do for LPC, but particularly for their passion in LPC Coffee Collaboration. And with that, I'll turn it over to our speakers. Thanks again for joining us today.
All right, well, I will start off and introduce myself, and then I'll let JoAnn do so as well. Jennifer Carrico. I have been, somebody asked me, how long have you been working from home? And I say 20 plus years because I don't want to add up exactly how many years it has been. But my career has taken me through some agriculture publications. The last couple years I had a freelance business, and then in October I started with the Iowa Cattlemen's Association. For those of you that don't know me, my background is in the cattle industry, and which is how I know JoAnn through the Angus industry. And so the job I have now gives me the opportunity to talk to cattle producers on a daily basis. And I still am doing some writing as well, which is nice. They let me write for the magazine and do other things for our communications department. So really enjoy doing that. And I live on our family farm in central Iowa and raising the 6th generation in the cattle business here on our farm. So JoAnn, you want to give them your...
My name is JoAnn Pipkin, and I run my business, Show Me Agricom, here out of my house in Republic, Missouri. I've started my career in ag communications as a farm broadcaster, and I worked for 5 years for a radio station in Springfield. And then after I had my daughter back in the late 90s, I just up and quit my job and decided to be a farm wife, and then my business has kind of evolved from there, and I strictly do freelance and on-contract work, writing, public relations, a little bit of graphic design. Just basically, I've over the years tried not to limit the projects that come in, really, really enjoy getting to do a variety of different things in the ag communications business. It's kind of a busy place around my camp. I've worked here at home for, I think, 23 years this month, and every day is different. I might be in the office. I try to be in the office most every day, but I never know. I might have to be out on the farm doing something or running an errand here or there or whatever. But we have a purebred registered Angus operation that's been in my husband's family for 5 generations. And I have 2 children that show cattle. One is actually in the workforce now, and the other one is 11. And so we get to live this industry every single day. And I think that over the years, that's really helped me in my career kind of stay in tune to what's going on and what types of information that farmers want to know. So I'm happy to be here today and honored that I was asked to join. Jen, I'll kick it back to you and let you start.
All right, sounds good. So I guess the way to start every story is finding the story ideas, and this has changed for me based on what my job has been, but I guess I broke it down into 3 categories assigned by a supervisor of publication, and that would be true for both when I worked for a publication and when I was doing freelance, because I would get some freelance jobs that were specific, very specific, and then I had to go out and find the sources to interview. And then there are probably, actually in both cases, the original ideas for a specific time of the year or a specific subject. When I worked for High Plains Journal, we would have maybe a beef cover, and so then I would have to find a story that would go with that, or if it was a specific time of year, planting season or harvest, when you're talking about crops. So those were 2 examples of that. And then also lots of stories that I would cover would be from meetings and conferences, and I would say that would be both for when I was working for a publication and when I was doing freelance work. And currently now I still will listen to webinars and go to conferences and write stories. I was able to go to NCBA convention and wrote a couple stories from that were used in our magazine. And then I remember specifically a webinar that I was a part of here. Trying to think when that was. I think everything kind of blends together lately. But in our last magazine, I had a story about a webinar that was a current events type thing with marketing and all things that have to do with the cattle industry. So there's lots of different ways to find the story idea. It's just based on there's lots of factors involved, but those would be the 3 sections that I would narrow it down to. JoAnn?
I agree with all of those that Jennifer has talked about this morning. But another key component to helping me find story ideas, honestly, has just been being a farmer's wife and listening to, the daily ins and outs of what's going on in our operation, what might be affecting our neighbors, whether it's, an outbreak of armyworms or maybe white clover that's causing cattle to bloat or what have you. And then, also I, over the years, have developed just kind of a really good working, friendly relationship with even a lot of the extension folks in our county and nearby counties. And so, I might just up and out of the blue call them and say, hey, what's going on? Is there anything I kind of need to have my eye on? And, they're really great to be that source knowledge, one-on-one connection with farmers if I haven't been able to be out, or I haven't talked to anybody, or I just need a fresh perspective. I think they're great people to lean on. Another thing that I'm a news junkie, I guess, and probably that goes back to my days when I worked in radio. The station that I worked for was very much news was their business, and so I listened to that station every single day, all day long, and I always knew what was going on. And so over the years, I still to this day, you know, if there's something happening in the news, I'm always thinking, now how would this impact our business, or what do farmers and others in the ag industry, what do we need to know, you know, that's coming out? Is there a tie or a connection we can spin off of that particular topic? So that's always just been a very integral part of helping me find story ideas. And then another thing, and you know, it maybe just kind of hit me, you know, just being present in the day. I'm very blessed that I get to work at home in an office where I can look outside my window and I can see the cows in the pasture. And, you know, is there something going on out there that maybe everybody else needs to know about? Or, you know, maybe I'm driving down the road on a road trip. Do I see something on my journey that might make a good story? So I would encourage you, as you look for story ideas, just to be present in the moment and just stop and look and listen to your surroundings, because there's always something going on, it seems like, that can help generate a story idea. Jen?
Okay, so then we're going to talk about where we find our story sources. I am lucky to have been brought up in the agriculture industry, so I have lots of friends that say I went to college with, that are in the industry, all across the industry, whether it's on the hog industry or corn and soybeans, the cattle industry. I will use those contacts, whether they work at for a commodity group or are a business owner. Those are my favorite contacts. When I did some stories last year for Successful Farming, and they were dairy stories, and I actually worked at a dairy, which a lot of people don't know, right after college. And so then my wheels start turning and think about who do I know that's in the dairy industry. A friend of mine that was a district officer with me in FFA owns a dairy in Northwest Iowa. So I called him and we had and I did an interview with him. And I will honestly say a lot of the story sources that I use are either people that I know or people that I know, you know, I will use as a source to find those people. If I knew, I remember I needed to write a story, a corn story, and I happened to have a picture of this really cool picture of irrigated corn in Nebraska. So then I start thinking, who do I know that's a seed salesman in Nebraska? And so then I thought of one, and I called him and said, hey, who do you know that raises irrigated corn? So I could interview them for a story, because I had this picture I wanted to use. Yes, kind of crazy. You know, a lot of times I wouldn't necessarily have been on their farm, but the connection, and we'll talk about the rapport next, but those connections are huge in finding story sources. And I would even say people that I knew from when I was on the National Junior Angus Board, people I knew from that I could say, hey, do you know anybody in your area that does this or does that? And those are great sources. And it might be somebody that you interviewed for a story that you know that they would know of someone else with a similar situation, but you don't want to use the same source. So you call them and say, hey, do you know somebody else that raises white corn or something like that? and so it's all about the networking and the honestly, you know, the people you know and the people you've met through the years. JoAnn?
Yep, I would agree on all of that. You know, I was a former state FFA officer many, many years ago, and to this day in my career, I still those are my go-to people. You know, whether it's somebody now that works for, you know, a major media outlet, or it's just someone to help me find, you know, a good person to interview. I think those connections are so very, very critical in this industry. Other people that I use to help me find sources, again, I go straight back to the person that I married, and you know, he and you know, other family members that are involved in the agriculture industry are so very key to helping me locate good sources for the stories that I write. We farm our neighbors' farms, so you know, it's not uncommon for me to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Steve, have you got a good idea of somebody, you know, somebody that I can talk to? Have you talked to anybody that's going through XYZ?" And so building that personal network of people to locate story sources, I think is very, very critical in what we do. The extension personnel, you know, I mentioned them whenever I was looking for story ideas. Well, they're wonderful sources of information to help point you in the right direction for sources, because a lot of times they might have had a phone call from someone who was going through a specific situation, you know, with cattle, or maybe they're growing a special crop that might need some extra attention, but they see those people every day one-on-one, whereas I might not always be out in the field every single day. And so they're great people to rely on for sources of information. And then another thing that I do, I told you I was a news junkie. Well, my family calls me a stalker because seriously, if I get a story idea, or I'm looking for somebody that might be a really big player on a certain topic, I'm going to Google them. I'm going to look them up on the internet and see what I can find out. You know, if I'm doing a story on rural healthcare, for instance, you know, I did one of those a few years ago for the Angus Journal, and I really didn't know a lot about rural healthcare. I live in a suburb, and so healthcare is not as big of a challenge for me as it is a lot of other folks in the ag industry. So, you know, I did some research, and that internet and Google was very, very key to helping me locate some key things that were going on in rural healthcare. And then I simply turn to my own doctor and say, "Look, I'm working on this story. Can you help me find some good people? Or would you be interested in sharing some information that would be good to share with farmers and others in rural America on this topic?" So don't be afraid to use that computer keyboard. I'm not saying it's always the best, but it can certainly help you, if not point you in the right direction, it can help you generate some other ideas that you can bring back local, I think. Jen?
So next would be building rapport, building a relationship and a comfort level with your interviewee. I guess first off, I would say dress for the setting you'll be in. If you're going to be at a cattle farm or a hog farm, you're obviously going to dress differently than if you are going to headquarters of a seed company, for example. So, you know, that's just common sense. Make sure that you're comfortable and they're comfortable as well. And then next, get to know the interviewee. Oftentimes I'll, this will move on into the next part of finding something in common. If someone has helped me find this person, I'll mention that contact, and I'll say, "Hey, Joe Smith gave me your number, and he said you would be a good contact for the story about such and such. And that tends to make them more comfortable that, oh, that person usually would be somebody that they would know and trust. And so therefore, it makes the interviewee more comfortable with you. I also like to, some of these can sometimes get you in a little pickle if somebody doesn't get along or they don't have the same views or something like that. But in agriculture, it's, I think that we tend to know people in our area, know people in our industry, and even if we have differences in opinion, we tend to still show that we're not gonna discredit that person because they have a different opinion. So, or an interest. If they're an Angus breeder, I can say, hey, how long have you been in the Angus business? And we can really have a good conversation because my family's been in the Angus business for a long time. So those kind of things are good ways to get farmers more comfortable. Farmers and ranchers tend to say to me, I remember I heard it, I couldn't even tell you how many times I heard it. Oh, well, my story is not really that exciting, or my story isn't any different than anybody else's. But even if I was interviewing somebody that I knew well, I would tell them, I probably know the answers to these questions, but I'm going to ask them anyway. And it usually would get me more information than what I knew in the first place. And then lastly, notice things around you. Notice if they have a picture of their family on the wall. Ask them about that. Or if they have like for instance, my family farm is a century farm, so which means it's been in the same family for over 100 years. I would definitely notice if somebody had that sign up and make that connection. Anything that you see or notice around their farm, or if you're in their office, you can notice those kind of things. And it might be even something as simple as the shirt they're wearing, it has a logo on it that you recognize, or a piece of jewelry or something. The littlest things can make people be more comfortable if you ask them about it, that's something that's important to them. JoAnn?
I think also, farmers are they're ones to not want to share their information. Sometimes they're leery of the media. I always want farmers, specifically if I'm interviewing a farmer, whether it's on the phone or in person, I want them to know I'm one of them. I am a ag journalist specifically. I grew up on a farm. I was raised in the dairy industry. I'm now the wife of a beef cattle operator. And I want those folks to know that, because I think what it does is it not only helps you build rapport, but puts them more at ease, and it builds a trust. And so, I think that trust in the media business, in the communications journalism industry, I think that's very, very important. They need to know that they can trust us, and that helps them open up, be a little bit more comfortable about sharing their story. And I think that's above all the bottom line. Another thing that can help build rapport and get you off on a good foot whenever you're there for an interview is to be punctual. Whether you're on the phone or you're going on site for an interview, you need to be sure that you leave early and that you're on time. I'm not saying be there 30 minutes ahead of time, but for sure 5, if not 10 minutes ahead of time. That helps you get your bearings, and it also, just allows you a little time to, to let them know that you are serious about what you're doing, and you're there, and Granted, you don't want to take up a lot of their time. I mean, their time is very valuable, just like ours is. And so be punctual with that interview, you know, arrival. And then, you know, I always try to, yes, make small talk, but I don't want to be there and take up half their day, because they've got a lot of other important things to do as well. So I do think that that's important in building rapport. I don't have this down, but, you know, always be sure that if you're driving to that site, you know exactly how to get there. So, you know, we've become very, very accustomed to, you know, plugging an address into our maps. Well, that's all fine and good until you get into rural America and you lose internet connection, or a county road seems to have changed since that map was updated, and you don't exactly have all of the directions that you need. And trust me, I have been there. This is personal experience, but you always should have a backup plan for those directions, so that it doesn't delay you in being punctual and timely for that interview. Jen?
All right, so then some interviewing skills, some things that I use. First off, be prepared by knowing your subject. And I didn't always, I'm not going to say that I am an expert in everything that I've asked. I probably tend to ask more questions for the things that I am not in common with, as something that would be, say, related to beef cattle, because that's I have a lot of background in that. But know your subject. Even if you have to Google search something about raising soybeans or raising wheat or alfalfa, or I use a lot of the crops on my for my examples, because I know less about them. But don't, you know, just because you don't know about something doesn't mean that you can't learn about it before you go. So I know what JoAnn says about recording and what I say about recording. I did not record every time I was out. I would always ask if I could first, because I feel like that's important. They need to know that you're doing that. But if I did, I would tend to write down if they said something very important and I knew I wanted to get exactly what they said. I would write down the time on the recording, so I didn't have to listen through the whole thing to find that spot. I also, even if I was recording it, I also would always take notes, especially when I will say this, when I'm listening to a speaker at a convention or an event, they will do their speech in chronological order, and that's how I want to write the story. They're going to talk about, very rarely would I switch around the way that they would talk about things in their speech. And I figured if they're the expert in that, they know what order things are as an importance. I'm a note taker. If you could see my desk right now, you would think that I was some crazy, that I probably had some bit of the sticky note company, because I have them everywhere. And then once I've done something and it doesn't pertain to anything, then it disappears. And so notes are a very important thing to me. And then always listen to their answers to get more questions. I would sometimes have prepared questions before I go, but not always. I would usually have several points of things that I needed to make sure I got that answer for: their background, their how they came about finding out about some certain disease or whatever it might be. I would have kind of an outline for myself, but I didn't want to necessarily say that's the only thing I could ask. Especially in human interest stories, they will always say something more than you could ever have been prepared for. And that would go back to the recording thing. I'll say my favorite story I ever wrote was about, and some of you on the call probably have read it. It was about a man in Kansas who was electrocuted and survived and lost both of his legs, and was in the hospital for a long time. And I still get emotional thinking about it. It was probably, I could tell you the 3 most emotional stories I ever wrote, and that one is number 1 by a long ways. And because of that, I knew that I was going to have that recording, because I knew that I was going to get into what they were saying and not get all my notes written down. So, know what you're getting yourself into, I guess you could say. Be prepared, because you can be as prepared as you think you are, and you're still gonna not be as prepared enough. But always listen to their answers to find more questions to ask. And then if you don't understand something, ask for clarity, because there will be times that you will ask something and they'll answer a short answer, and farmers and ranchers are very, very known to do this in my experience. You'll say, trying to think of an example, it'll be something technical that you want them to answer, but they will answer it in a short little blurb. And then you have to say, can you give me an example, or can you give me more information on that? And don't feel bad about doing that, because most times they don't realize they're even answering that way. And then always ask for proper spellings and titles. Those are pretty common things, but Jennifer might be with 1 N instead of 2, or JoAnn might be spelled with a capital A and an E on the end, and they might spell the name of their farm differently than the common way. So while and a lot of times they'll hand you a business card, which is nice, so you can use that. But those are I guess that would be my main things. And I will say one other thing about the story in Kansas. So it's Zach Short, and if you haven't read that story, you can probably Google it. Nothing Short of a Miracle is the name of is the title, and that was a quote from his wife, who they're just an amazing couple. And actually his mom just wrote a book, which I have sitting on the stand behind me. I just got, and I'm very excited to be able to read that and hear, because I interviewed her also. So also, I guess that's one other thing I would say. If you get somewhere and they talk a lot about one person in particular, and then don't feel bad about, especially human interest, don't feel bad about say, hey, could I ask that person a few questions? I actually, when I was there, was only planning on interviewing he and his wife. I also ended up interviewing his mother and the guy that saved him or pulled him off of the ladder. And so that was an employee of theirs. So one interview, it ends up being an interview of 4 people. And I would say that's not necessarily common, but in human interest stories, it is very common. JoAnn?
Okay, here we come to our differing of opinions. And when I was reading through Jen's notes and she said, record but always ask. I mean, for me, it's always record, end of story. And I probably depend on that recorder from my days as a farm broadcaster, because that little tape recorder went everywhere with me. But as a journalist, I think the bottom line is that recorder always protects you, because if you write that story and the person you've interviewed said, well, I didn't say that, you can say, but you did say that, because you know they did. You've got it on tape. And the bottom line though, in my recording, I always let the person I'm interviewing know that I would like to interview them. And I always ask first. I always let them know when I'm turning the recorder on, because I don't want to be putting myself in a position where it's uncomfortable, for them to be recorded, and if they say, well, that's off the record, or they say, I'm going to say something that is off the record, you can always pause that recorder or shut it off, let them know you've shut it off. But I just think recording is a good practice to have as a journalist. And over the years, I mean, we've come a long way with technology, and there are so many transcription services on the market today that, for me personally, and being a one-person shop here in the freelance industry, those transcription services are very, very key to my productivity. I can record, an hour and a half interview and know that I'm not going to have to spend, a day and a half listening to tape and transcribing it. I can simply upload an audio file, and I can get that transcription back, in a matter of a few hours. I'm not saying they're foolproof. I've interviewed folks with foreign accents, and you do have to be careful. That's why I think note taking can be an integral part with the recording, so that they kind of work hand in hand. And if for some reason you don't get exactly what you needed on that recording, you can always go back to your notes. Even though I say always record, also always make sure that your equipment works before you get there. You've always got a spare battery. Always make sure that recorder's in your camera bag if you're going to be taking pictures too. I mean, it's just got to be a part of your person whenever you go on site to do those interviews. And I've been in positions where maybe I got sidetracked leaving the house or something, and I've forgotten my tape recorder. Well, that's where that iPhone comes in handy. So, there is always that backup, but those iPhones make me nervous. So I kind of still like my handy dandy trusty little digital recorder. Another thing for me is to be sure that I give my full attention to the person that I'm interviewing. I genuinely want to know about that person and what they're talking about. I want to be inquisitive. I want to enjoy being there, whether I have the worst headache known to man or what have you. I have done interviews in pickup trucks bouncing over very bumpy, rocky farm ground, and this girl gets car sick. So I have been in those situations where I just flat didn't feel good, but I still have to be present and enjoy being there so that I can ensure that I get the story. The other thing for me personally, and I would encourage all journalists to adapt this, is just be prepared to learn when you go out to do an interview. It's important that we remember we are not the expert on this subject. We don't go into that interview knowing everything. We don't go into that situation with a preconceived notion. As a journalist, we're doing the interviewing, but the person we're interviewing is the expert on that topic. And we're there to learn their story and then educate others. And, it took me, I don't know, years and years and years as a journalist before I ever fully understood that concept, that I was there to educate others. I had never, ever thought about it before. And I actually was interviewing a dairy farmer that I had known when I was a child. And here I am as an adult, I'm interviewing him for a story. He had stage 4 cancer at the time. It was another one of those really, really emotional type settings. But, that farmer told me that day that I helped him learn. I was an educator, and he depended on me to learn what other people in the industry were doing. And I had never, I think, fully grasped that concept until he told me that that day. So today, when I go out to do interviews, I always keep that in mind, that I am an educator. I am a teacher for other farmers and others in the industry to help them learn how to better their business, how to, keep their business on the cutting edge, or how to just make it be successful. But farmers learn, truly from what we're telling them. And so I think it's important that we keep that in mind. Another thing that I think is very, very important as a journalist, and I see this a lot in young journalists today. I don't know if it's something that they haven't been taught, or they don't think they need to. I'm not sure what it is, and I'm not trying to pick on people, but always, always, always send your article back for approval before it goes to publication. Your reputation is at stake as a journalist, and you don't want to lose that as a journalist. You just want to be sure that you've always, got your I's dotted and your T's crossed. So always send that article back for approval. Another thing I would add to that is that we need to always remember to ask open-ended questions as journalists. Those are good interviewing skills, but I think sometimes we forget those as journalists. We don't want to ask a question that is a simple yes or no answer, because that's not getting the information that we need to tell the story. And then also, I talk a lot about being present, and I probably say that because I am always, it seems like, guilty of not being present. My mind is doing 100 things at once, and I am a multitasker a lot of the time. And so I need to remember to be present for the interview. I would encourage you to be present for the interview. Avoid those out-of-body experiences. I remember when I first started in farm radio, the person that trained me, he was like, you're going to be interviewing somebody and you're going to be having the worst out-of-body experience. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But yeah, that can really happen. So you just got to kind of take a deep breath and focus on what you're doing, and truly be present for the interview, so that you can really get the real story that's there. I do have one client that I write for that they like a little more of a picturesque type introduction to the story, lead to the story. So, when I go out and do those interviews, I'm always paying attention to the surroundings. Whether I'm driving around a hilly back road, or I'm driving down a busy 4-lane highway, I always try to be present so that I can see those surroundings, and maybe there's a way I can integrate that into the story whenever I actually come to write it. But, be aware of the surroundings, be present for the interview, and do your very best to try to avoid those out-of-body experiences. Okay, Jen, I'm going to kick it back to you.
So that's pretty much our presentation. I guess, does anybody have any specific questions for us? And we'll try to get you an answer.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat yet, but we'll give people a few minutes. Thank you guys so much for sharing your perspectives. I love the point about listening to answers to the questions so you know what else to ask, because I think so often you have kind of a bit of an agenda, or you think you have an angle, and then you get into it and it really, there's something that you had no idea you would get to talk about that becomes your story. So I thought that was great. You guys really did a great job. I'm kind of sitting here without any major questions to ask, and I'm not seeing anybody else did either.
I think Sheila said she had one.
Yep, Sheila's got one. Sheila, you can just unmute and ask. Feel free to do that.
That's faster than me typing it. So I loved your presentation. Thank you, Jennifer and JoAnn. I do all of my interviews over the phone, in which I know I miss out on getting that connection with people, seeing their surroundings. Is there a way to try to get a better connection with your subjects or fill them out? You know, I always ask them, and 90% of my interviews are with cow-calf producers. I always ask them, you know, about their operation, how many generations they've been raising cattle, and their breeds, their calving periods, their nutrition program. Is there any other ways to get a connection with them so I can write a more interesting lead?
You know, I don't know, maybe is there something, is there a way to ask them if they had, if there's something unique about their operation or something that's happened to them recently that, you know, maybe you could pull that into the story. You know, maybe, I know the weather is kind of a boring thing to talk about a lot of times, but so much of what we do in agriculture is dependent on the weather. Is, you know, is there some type of growing condition or some type of anything that they're experiencing, their personal experience that you can bring into the story that way? I don't know, that's just an idea.
Yeah, I like that as well. I would say I like the one where you ask them if, you know, if they've learned anything that they do differently now than they did when they first started.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we could all say in whatever we've been involved in, we don't necessarily do things now that we did when we started. So that would be another way to get them to open up and say, you know, yeah, I decided I should early wean my calves because they did better at a feed bunk than they did going in a creek feeder or something. I mean, that would just be an example.
Good suggestions. Thank you both.
Okay, well, we're at 10:49 and we try to keep this to 10:45 if we can. I'll turn it over though to Lindsay. Lindsay, did you have any announcements or anything you wanted to add here at the end?
No, good morning, everybody. The only thing is just for those of you that entered the LPC Awards contest, thank you for your entries. I am processing all of those entries this week, and if you haven't gotten your invoice yet, you will be getting it today. The judging will take place, and then we will still have awards. As you all know, if you've seen through the actiongram and information we've put out on social, we're in a holding pattern right now on Ag Media Summit. Our leadership and strategic planning committee is hoping to be able to make a decision the first part of June, when we are looking to have some more clarity on government restrictions and things with our hotel venue in Kansas City. So stay tuned on that. But we will still have an awards presentation. At this point, it's kind of up in the air just based on what's going to happen with AMS. So stay tuned for more info on those two things. The only other reminder I would say is that we did move our membership renewal period back this year. It's typically been January 1 to March 1, and our LPC board felt like April 1 to June 1 would maybe fit our membership better. And so our membership renewal period is to June 1. You can obviously renew after that date, but at this point, that's the date we're sticking with to get information in for the membership directory. One thing I would ask though, and this has been in the actiongram, is that if you send your dues in, please also make sure you hop on the LPC website and fill out the membership information form. There's one for publication members and one for service members. There's also one for student members if you know any students who want to join. But that information is really, really important because that's what I will use to create the membership directory for this year. If you know that you don't have any changes from the previous directory, I'll still need to get an email from you or some communication stating that. But that is the information that will be used for the membership directory. So if I don't have that information from a member, then it will be really tough for me to get them put in the directory. Or on the flip side, if you've already filled it out and you already have some changes in staffing or other things with your listing, please shoot me an email and let me know. But that's the main stuff going on with LPC right now. I know everybody's wondering about AMS, and we should have some more information for you here coming soon. Otherwise, happy Memorial Day.
I'd add to what Lindsay said, if you are sending a check-in and you haven't filled out that form, you might want to just shoot her an email that says, hey, I'm sending my check-in for my membership, because we had one that got caught up in the mail and they didn't know if it was paid or not, and so they paid online too. So, you know, just to keep it easier for Lindsay and paperwork, just let her know if you are doing it that way. And I'll also say I'm on the AMS steering committee. It has not been an easy, these decisions we have to make are not easy. We obviously want things to be back to normal. We want to be able to see everybody, but we also want to stay safe and make the right decision for both organizations, all the organizations. There's more than just the two that are involved, and it's I'll say, for one, I'm not really looking forward to the first week of June, because I think there's going to be a lot of decisions made, not just AMS, but other things that my family's involved with, and many of you on the phone are as well. So keep everybody in your thoughts. We say on our board calls, we say call somebody, check on your friends, check on your neighbors. You know, mental health is a concern with all ages right now, and being able to just get a little message from a friend is always a good thing. So I don't have anything else. If you do, JoAnn, or anybody else.
I don't have anything else. Thanks for having me join you today.
Yeah.
I think Shelley wants to talk.
Yeah, when does Shelley not want to talk, right? That's I know. I have a question. Is it all right if I show this in class when we start having classes again in the fall? You girls, ladies, women did a really great job. I love the way you bounce things off of each other, that there's not one right way to do it. There are multiple right ways to do it, which I think students get hung up with sometimes is, oh, Shelley said this, it means it always has to be that way. And I always tell them, this is my way. There are other people out there. Here's what I think. But, you know, they've got this thing going. It's kind of like I don't know who tells them not to send their stories back, because that sure isn't me. We get everything proofed multiple times. But nevertheless, I just want to know if it's okay, Lindsay, to be able to show these in a class, if there's a way to work that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Angie does a really great job getting them on our YouTube channel. So
Okay.
You can go back and reference those, and please feel free to share any of the rest of them if you'd like. I know there's another AgCom program that I know has shared some of these with their students as well. And I mean, I think they're a great resource to anybody, but especially for students too, just to get some free continuing education. So feel free to share this one and whatever else you see on there that you think is relevant or helpful.
Oh, super. My other thing was just, as you guys think about ACT and AMS, all of us are on travel restrictions, and hopefully somebody shared that with you along, that even if it does happen, those of us in academia are forbidden to leave. We're not even really supposed to go in state right now.
Yeah, we've been following that. I know there's a few other universities that I know, like K-State's is through the end of July. And some of the folks I've talked to at different universities have said, well, if a student were going to travel, they'd have to do it on their own accord, but that doesn't necessarily help the faculty or staff at those universities. So we have been following that. I will say that what we are getting ready to roll out is a survey that will go out to LPC members as well as AAEA members and those who have been to AMS in the past. And we're trying to get a feel for what some of those travel restrictions are. And so when you see that online survey come across your email, please take a few minutes to fill that out. It's only a handful of questions. It shouldn't take too long, but we're trying to get a feel for when people can travel based on employer restrictions, and then also when they would feel comfortable traveling based on personal thoughts. We've even heard of some people possibly not being able to travel until 2021 January. And so, but we know for sure that the universities that's probably been the first one that we've heard the most about and we've been following. I saw CSU out in California, they're not even having fall classes. And so we are watching that and working on, that's obviously part of our contingency plan. I'll be transparent with you and tell you that we're looking at all the options just like everybody else in event planning right now. And I think it's because you have to. Virtual options, postponing options, moving it, just canceling it and having it in 2021. I think, realistically, until we get more clarity from the government for the state of Missouri, the state of Kansas, and also the city of Kansas City, the mayor, as well as what the restrictions and rules and things will be with our hotel. We really have had to look at all of our options that are out there, but like I said, we are getting ready to send out a survey. So when you see that come through on your email, please fill that out. My other shameless plug for filling out your member information form is that I continue to hear from members that are saying, hey, I'm not getting information from you. And then I check our email list and I don't have their email. So that's why it's really important for me to get that member information form filled out so I know who at your company or business needs to be getting email from us. Also, I've heard a little bit that sometimes email from AMS or LPC has been going to spam filters. We're trying to figure that out. So if you don't see that survey come through or the actiongram, maybe check with me that I have your email information and it's also not going to your spam. But thanks, Shelley, for that note. We are watching those universities. I haven't heard though on OSU, is there a date that they told you or is it indefinite right now?
The last I knew it was indefinitely on the travel. We were supposed to resume office operations on June 1, and that's been pushed back to July 7th. And so it's hard to know. We were just, the last email we got that I remember getting, although there are a bunch of them obviously, is that we were not to travel until further notice. Mm-hmm. So I just really don't know. And I mean, the kids mostly travel on their own money, but they can't get any money from us if we are under that travel restriction. Like there's no way for us to help them financially or otherwise if that happens. So we're just keeping a close eye on it. I mean, obviously, and I'm in the middle right now. I don't want to digress too much, but we're in the middle of a conference right now for AAAE, and I will tell you, it's going way better than I ever could have imagined virtually. I really thought it'd be a train wreck to try to do it that way. I'm not completely pessimistic, but I just didn't know. And I have probably gotten more out of it than I would have gotten at the conference. Now, that's not going to be the same with AMS, but my point is, I think everybody, if we don't get to be in the same place for some reason, if that's how that works out, I think there's still ways you can interact and feel like people still care about each other and can still learn from each other. And we had a really good session yesterday on our end, just an open chat session about what we learned in the last half of the semester that's going to help us for all future semesters, things about how students work, etc. So. And
I would say, one of the options we have looked at is virtual, and we know that with Ag Media Summit, a lot of folks come for that continuing education piece, but they also really come for the networking too. And so we've been looking into some options if we do end up having to go virtual, or if that's the option that we feel like makes the most sense. We want to still have some options in place that people feel like they do have that opportunity to network a little bit and have some of that human, I guess, as human as we can get via Zoom or, across our computer screens, but we would be remiss to think that, AMS doesn't have that big piece of it, is that networking. And so we have been looking at some things. I'll give a shout out to our conference manager. She's been working on this since the very beginning. Planning conferences is what she does. And so she's been in the trenches of this for several months. And I've lost track of how many webinars and meetings and things that she's been on, trying to get her, basically get her mind wrapped around this huge issue with having conferences, still trying to do them during coronavirus. And between she and Samantha Kilgore at AAEA and myself, we've been in contact with each other really regularly since the spring, really March, I guess, when all of this started to hit. And so we are looking at all the different things. And like you said, there are some ways that you can have some educational value, but also we will be looking for that networking and human interaction too, if we do end up deciding to go virtual.
Yeah, don't doubt. I would much rather have the conference. That is,
oh yes,
that is,
we all would.
I think, the first choice of all of us. That's a given, but I guess my point more than anything is just, if the worst case scenario happens, we can make a good situation out of it to the best of our ability. I think we're too talented and too caring of a group not to be able to make it to where at least we don't feel like we completely lost out like a lot of these things have done. I mean, I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at with this. And by the way, we're gonna do our very
best.
Always, you guys always do. So, I just mostly wanted to say hi to everybody too. So hi, JoAnn. Please give your daughter a hug.
Well, hi, Shelley.
I will, Shelley. It's good to see you.
Hi. Good to see you too. Okay, I'll be quiet now. Sorry.
Well, thanks again, Jen and JoAnn. Sorry, Shelley. I thought you were done. Again, thank you to Jen and JoAnn for your great presentation. I will get it edited and posted here in the next couple of days on YouTube and shared again on social and our website. So we don't have June scheduled yet. Be watching for that on social and in the newsletter. We'll get back with you guys on that here in the next couple weeks. But thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Jakey and Rocking K for making this possible. And I hope we get to see each other in July, so in person. So everybody take care and have a great Memorial Day weekend. So great to see you.
Thank
you.